to spend 22 months solo backpacking his way through 20 countries, including Australia, India, Myanmar, and Cuba. Since his return, he has had the pleasure to educate and inspire budding global nomads of all ages at various local organizations throughout the Chicagoland area. Learn more about his adventures and speaking engagements at mindfulvagabond.com. Please join me in welcoming Brian Michalski.
Hello, everyone. This is called Tiger's Eye. Cubans typically brag that you haven't properly experienced their country until you complete 4 tasks. Drink a mojito, smoke a cigar, salsa dance, and lastly, get with a local. As a feisty world-traveling backpacker open to new experiences, all activities certainly appeal to me, and I knew the opportunities would present themselves during my 2 weeks on the island. My first mojito was refreshing, with muddled aromatic mints, a generous overflowing double shot of rum. Beautiful. The cigar I smoked was rolled right before my eyes on a tobacco farm deep in the heart of picturesque Vinales Valley. I took salsa lessons in Havana and had a blast clumsily executing my moves on dance floors all across the country. Getting with a local, however, turned out far less ideally than the others. I knew I needed to make my one and only weekend in Havana count. Cabaret Las Vegas, a gay club, featured drag shows, a lively crowd, and cheap drinks. As a U.S. citizen, when visiting Cuba, your credit and debit cards are useless. You must budget ahead, bringing all necessary cash to eventually convert into Cuban pesos. I arrived with the equivalent of $750 to last 2 weeks, a budget-friendly amount that also allowed for occasional splurging. My chosen hostel was basic, but of the 5 places I ended up staying in Cuba, it was the only one that had a safe. This worked out well, as the skin-tight vintage women's slacks I picked up for my big night out didn't have pockets big enough to fit my wallet or passport. It took all my gymnastic strengths just to squeeze in my iPhone, hostel keys, and 25 pesos, also the equivalent of $25. Drinks are cheap in Cuba, so this was likely to get me through the night. Once inside the club, I chatted up locals and other tourists over my first, second, and eventually third drink. Waiting for the universally late drag queens to take the stage, I stepped away to have a quick cigarette upstairs. In my horrible broken Spanglish, I asked 2 locals if I could borrow a lighter. One asserted himself, stepping forward and immediately lit my cigarette. With long eyelashes I will never forget, Jordan was friendly, funny, and thankfully had a better grasp on English than I did Spanish. "I like your bracelets," he attempted, pointing at my wrist. It was Tiger's Eye, a string of powerful yellow golden stones meant to protect and guide their wearer. It is said to help make decisions with discernment and understanding, remaining unclouded by your emotions. I had purchased it at a night market in Southeast Asia just 2 months prior. The drag show was mediocre, but I could have cared less. Jordan was fun, flirty, and sensual. His natural sense intoxicated me deeper than all the night's collective cocktails as we danced, swayed, and kissed. He was open and playful, which allowed me to let my guard down. This was the Friday night in Havana I had always envisioned. I had just enough cash for one more round, leaving me with 4 pesos for the short taxi ride back to my hostel. Jordan and I nursed our beers, less into them, more into each other. He inquired about where I was staying. After I told him I was sleeping in a 10-bed hostel the size of a closet, we refocused on his living space. He said he could host, and I was certainly keen for a sleepover. It came time to exit the club. We walked a few blocks to a more taxi-friendly spot. As we waited to hail one, he ran across the street to buy us each a can of Bucanero, the strong local beer. How sweet. Earlier on, I had treated a couple rounds, and now he was repaying the favor. He opened the beers and held them as we waited, finally handing mine over with a wink as we stepped inside our cab. It was an intimate 15-minute ride to his place. We held hands, intertwined fingers in the backseat, sipped our Bucaneros, and drunkenly exchanged newly learned flirtatious passes in each other's languages. I paid the cabbie a couple pesos, and we walked a few more blocks to his casa. Finally, arriving to his place, he said, "We wait here a bit." No problem, I thought, as we settled into his cozy patio chairs. Together, we watched YouTube videos of salsa performers on his phone under Havana's glowing moonlights. Blackouts. In a haze, I am stumbling slow motion through an unknown living room. There is another male with Jordan. Blackouts. Jordan is in possession of my iPhone, repeatedly incorrectly typing in the passcode. I am far too sedated to even attempt stopping them. Blackouts. Inside, outside, in a bed, or on a sidewalk. To this day, I will never know where they dragged me after they were finished with me. It was early in the morning, breezy and bright. The air was crisp, birds were chirping, classic cars whizzed by, and young families strolled down the concrete sidewalks. Dusting myself off, I reached into my left pocket. My final 2 pesos were gone, but my hostel keys were still there. In my right pocket was my iPhone, which now displayed the message, "iPhone is disabled." The tiger's eye bracelet that Jordan complimented earlier had also been removed. Still heavily drugged, I stumbled over to 4 Cuban locals. In mentioning a couple landmarks, I asked them how to get back to my hostel. They must have sensed something was wrong, because 5 minutes later, 2 police officers pulled up in a squad car. In my haze, I genuinely thought this was my magical taxi ride home, so I hopped right in and slept soundly in the back seat as they drove me to the police station. I sat in a nondescript waiting room with a dozen others for 2 hours. In between bouts of accidentally falling asleep in my hard lime green plastic chair, I pestered the officers, demanding they call me a cab. They politely ignored me, escorted me back to my uncomfortable spot, and made me wait. At one point, they put me on the phone with an English-speaking authority. "What is your name and passport number?" he asked. I told the stranger my credentials, also mentioning the drugging and robbery. The male voice seemed indifferent to these details and hung up. Finally, around noon, the officers released me. No questioning, no investigation, that was it. I got into a cab, told the driver where my hostel was, and after passing out in the front seat, arrived to my hostel. The worried owner, a young mother of twins, was so relieved to see me. She helped me pay the cabbie and guided me to my bed, where my body forced me to sleep an additional 20 uninterrupted hours. I woke up the next day hungry, parched, and groggy. It was a bright Sunday morning in Havana. Time to get out there and do what I had done every day for the last 20 months. Put on my backpack and go explore. It's Alcohol 101. Don't accept open drinks from strangers. Please learn from my naivete. Rapes and druggings are grossly underreported crimes that can happen anywhere at any time. No gender, sexuality, race, or age is immune. Victims are often shamed into silence, but I won't subscribe to that. Upon reflection, I'm lucky to have my limbs, organs, and of course my life. In examining myself afterward, there was no bruising, soreness, or fluids present. but regardless followed up for STI and HIV testing once arriving home to Chicago. All signs pointed to this being a largely failed robbery, and thankfully nothing more. Since this incident, I've come to terms with the fact that people in desperate circumstances must sometimes resort to unthinkable measures. I don't take it personally because my attacker felt he needed to do this to survive and likely provide for his loved ones. Certainly does not excuse his actions, but it has helped me to understand and eventually forgive him. Despite this incident, Cuba remains among the highlights of my 22-month adventure around the world. It is a place of such fire and passion. During my remaining days on the island, the locals and the ones that I interacted with were kind, caring, and generous. I choose not to give Jordan the power to shape how I perceive an entire nation. Hopefully the tiger's eye bracelet he now wears provides him the strength, guidance, and positive energy he needs. Thank you.